In the last video, I worked out the heat shield for the barrel of the Thompson section of the build. In the research that I'd done, I hadn't been able to find any specific drawings that related to the correct measurements of this piece. So I've created a 1-to-1 template measurement for this, and I'll include that on my website for anybody who'd like to make use of it. Okay, so it's time to start working on the truly terrifying part. All I have to do is carve in a total across the surface of this of 64 individual slots, all exactly the same size and all perfectly spaced to each other. No problem. So to make my life a little bit easier as far as working this sort of stuff out, I've made myself up a jig. It's pretty straightforward. It's 2 slots that are cut to the correct size and dimensions that we want, with a spacer part that replicates the one that's there, and the larger notch that you can see there gives me a spacer that works in the vertical direction so that I can make sure that the alignment of each row stays in line as well. So the way it works is pretty simple. This leading edge sits down in the slider, which is for the pump action, which gives me the alignment I need for that first row, and reversing it around the other way gives me the top alignment that I need as well. So you can see where I've scribed in a line there. That's my start line that tells me where I need to work out that first slot. So all I need to do is line that up on the inside to that edge, scribe in a line around there, do the same thing with the next one, and then all I need to do is bring this one to this one. And with a bit of perseverance, I end up with that. You can see I've already milled out the large rejection port. The lower section is a little bit trickier. That's where these extra slots come into play. This one and this one have to line up, so I have to start with that middle point, and that's where this extra slotted piece helps me out. As soon as I've got the position worked out for that one, I can drop down to there first, bring those 2 in, and then work backwards this way to pick up that one, and then I can continue the rest of the way. These lines obviously still aren't 100% accurate, but they do give me a good spacing and a good positioning to make sure that I'm not drifting off. And then in the same way that I made up this jig piece, I can go back in afterwards with a file and get them cleaned up and matching the shape and spacing that we're looking for. The jig piece that I made up for cutting in the slots is slightly undersized, so that when I scratch in those guidelines, I can be sure that I'm not going outside the size that the slots really need to be. But once they're cut in, I end up with that, which gets me around about 85 to 90% of the way there. And then from there, I'm just using my collection of files to go through and just finish cleaning up those slots to their proper size. To assist in doing that, I've made up another jig, and that piece has been made as an insert, so it's sort of like 1.5 of the slots. So all I have to do is file that piece out so that insert just fits, and then maintain that spacing piece between the two. And working along that way on a piece-by-piece basis, it means that I can maintain each section so that it ends up exactly the right size.
One eternity later.
What we end up with is this. Corresponds to the next one, and so on, so that I can go right along for each one of those pieces, and they all end up identical to each other. Now, I've basically got to repeat that on the other side, but that gives you a fairly good idea of what it should look like. Now that I've got a finished piece, I can start paying attention to the bits that go inside it, namely the barrel and the pump action mechanism. The original version of this does actually have slots on top as well, but that's something I'm not really going to bother with because they essentially can't be seen anyway, and really just end up getting covered up by the other component pieces that go across the top. So whilst I'm briefly talking about barrels, I did find a piece that was suitable for the Thompson barrel. This can be a little bit trickier to find because the outside diameter of that particular metal piece is a fairly standard size of about 16mm, which tends to be the standard size you find for this same sort of aluminium tubing. What I ended up finding was a piece of aluminium tube that's used in tent poles, and what that's made up from is a piece that's been spot welded inside there, so that can connect to become an extendable rod. But what I found is by cutting that off and sanding that down, it gives me a piece that tapers towards the end, which is exactly what the original barrel did, and that ends up being a perfect fit for that piece that goes on there. The pump action barrels, though, they're a bit of a different story. The original concept borrowed from 2 different types of setup. One was the pump action assembly that you see there, and there was a second one that used the cage arrangement. Interestingly, on the original weapon that they came off, the cage orientation was the other way around. What I'm going to be making up is something that mimics this assembly. I don't need it to be as detailed as this because a lot of the structure of it will be hidden by the cage itself, but I do want to go for something that has a similar sort of operation in terms of the way the pump action and the breech work. I did a rough eyeball measurement of the distance that I have inside there to work with, and I went through my scrap section and found a piece of tube that was very close to that measurement. Quite a bit of banging and bashing, I've come up with this. I've still got to clean the surfaces up, but that pretty much gives me the general shape that I need. I don't have to worry about that slope area that features there because it's going to be completely hidden. I just want to be able to mimic these cutaway features that are on the side there for both the trigger and where the internal magazine load goes. I've already started working out the front mounting piece. So now what I need to do is to refine all this together, some sort of corresponding aspect to the look that we're going for. So on the next video I should be able to work on achieving that classic sound. But that's the update for this time, guys. Thanks for watching. Talk to you next time.